Yeah, so I think hopefully, like, what's clear from this first half of the lesson is that we've essentially covered two things. We've covered one, how to define a number for every sat in the network, right? And then we've also covered how to track those sats as they move about the network. And so now we have this unique identifier that can follow sats around wherever they go. And that leads us to inscriptions where we're actually going to associate data with particular sats.
Okay, inscriptions. What is that? Why is this the juicy part?
So, inscriptions are the juicy part because now that we have a way to identify and understand where every sat is in the network through all transactions, inscriptions give us a way to add data to the Bitcoin blockchain, and it's stored there forever. And then what inscriptions allow us to do is put this data on chain. And then the Ordinals protocol says, great, we will help you associate an individual Satoshi, which we can now track across the network, with this data. And so now we have this great marriage, and that's how we get our beautiful JPEGs on chain. What I wanted to do is look briefly here at a ordinal creation transaction. Inscriptions are created by including an ord envelope, and we're not going to get into the details of what an ord envelope is today, but basically all it does, it says, hey, put this data on the blockchain and make sure the ord protocol indexes it. So you don't need to know what these op false op if things are. Basically all you need to know today is that this little inscription we're creating is basically just putting text on there, and that text is going to say hello world. And so in the ordinal creation transaction, we have some input, and it looks like, Jan, again here, you own that input. And you're basically saying, hey, with this input, I want to associate this data, this hello world data, with a sat. Which sat is it going to be? Well, it's going to be the first sat. And so up here now, essentially what you're doing is you're saying, hey, in this sat up here, whatever its number is, let's say it's sat number 101, you're saying, I want to associate it with hello world. And, I'm sure you have other sats down here. Let's just assume they're sequential for today, make it easy. So 103, 104, and 105, right? So these are our sat numbers. We already discussed how those come about and how we get those. And now you're saying, put this hello world data on chain. And now you're sending these sats to me, right? Via an output. You could send them to yourself. You could send them to whoever you wanted. But in this case, we're going to look at you sending them to me. And so if we go back to our ordinal protocol theory, well, we know what's going to happen here. We know now I'm going to have sat number 101. I'm going to have sat number 102. I'm going to have sat number 103. And I'm going to have sat number 104. I'm the owner. These are the 4 sats I own. Now, the fun part is, what you might notice is that down here, there is no ordinal envelope, right? There is no data here. No data, right? This data from ordinals, this is only put on the chain once. And that's because it's expensive to put this on the chain. It costs a lot of fees to put a lot of data on the chain. If you want to put, let's say, a 4 megabyte JPEG of a wizard on the chain, you're going to have to pay quite a bit in fees to do that. And so every time you want to send that 4 megabyte wizard, you don't want to have to send all of that data again, right? Well, wonderful. Now, all you have to send is sat number 101, because sat number 101 now points back to this hello world data. We basically said, hey, hello world is associated with sat number 101. Wherever sat number 101 goes in its future, whoever owns that owns the ordinals data that's way down here. But that ordinals data is just going in this one block, right? So if this is number block 781, that's the only place that this data is going to show up. It is not going to show up the next time you send sat number 101 in block number, 872. It's only in this first block.
Yeah, this is great. And I think one more thing that is important to add here, right? It's related to basically all the wallets and all the other software, all the other explorers, and basically everything else that is built around this, right? Because these things need to be aware of the ordinal theory, how it works, because otherwise
Mhm.
it just all gets messed up.
Let's talk about what actually happens on chain for real. We're pulling up our block explorer again because I think it's a funny example. What we're going to do is we're going to go find the Genesis transaction or creation transaction for an ordinal. And what I've pulled up is the one for this OMB who is a block explorer.
Before you get into that, I think what's interesting, or again, like for everybody, your
Yeah.
example with Hello World, it's just one type of information, one type of data that you can put on chain. But now, we're looking into this example of OMB, of literal JPEG living on chain.
Let's take a look at this example, and I've pulled it up straight off ordinals.com. I want to point out a few things, right? I've obviously already highlighted over here what we want to talk about, which is the Genesis fee and the Genesis transaction. So the Genesis transaction is the transaction in which this ordinal actually appeared on chain. That's very interesting. What you might notice just from our lesson thus far is that in fact, there's already a SAT number here, right? So the Genesis transaction is going to show us when this JPEG was associated with this SAT number. And you'll even see that it actually tells us, okay, this is going to be a JPEG. And it tells us that it's going to be about 50 kilobytes, right? So let's dive in, right? Let's go down and let's see what that Genesis transaction is. So if you click on this on ordinals.com, it'll pull up a transaction and you can go actually open that transaction on mempool.space. I've kind of depicted here that we start out and this input is where the OMB is actually created. So since there's only one input in this one, it looks like one giant thing, but the OMB is created in this input. And then what happens is it is associated with the first SAT of the first output. And in this transaction, we only have one output. We have this OMB exiting. And if you recall, we talked about last time, fees are not specified as an output. It's just whatever's left over from the transaction. So this transaction only has one input and one output, right? And you can see that down here in the inputs and outputs, right? We have one input from this address and one output to this address. And you can see the fees are a pretty fat fee here. And you might be asking, why am I paying, $74 to put this input on a transaction? Well, if you open the details and you scroll down, what you will see is that the actual ORD envelope is part of the input. And so this is where the inscription is actually stored on chain. So I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to circle it for you. This whole bit, this op0 all the way down, and then it's going to push 50 kilobytes of data. So if you go look at this, you'll see that push data to occurs over and over and over again. Lots of data is being pushed on chain. The data of the beautiful red eye OMB you saw above, right? And so what's happening is that after this transaction occurs, if we go back up here, now the Bitcoin network is going to have to download this JPEG data. But whenever this output gets spent, this 10,000 SAT output, the only thing that's getting sent around is a SAT. And it's going to be SAT number 972-1100-595-20518. And that SAT number is the SAT associated with this creation transaction, right? So when the OMB gets sent around, it's not the data that's being sent around every time. If I sent the OMB to you, Jan, the data is not getting sent with it again. The data is not going into the input field because fees would be astronomical, right? All that's getting sent is a SAT number. And we collectively have decided that if you own that SAT number, then you own the data that is associated with it in this Genesis transaction.
Yeah, this is great. Just for me to maybe simplify it for you even further, if you go down into that ORD envelope, you could basically just showcase the JPEG here, right? Obviously, this data is a representation of that JPEG that is being inscribed on chain, that is being put on chain on Bitcoin. And then the second thing, I think for you specifically, Tyler, let's say you got this OMB from the creator, meaning that they created
Right.
this and then they send it to you right away. And you
Right.
haven't sent it to anybody else, then basically that chain of transactions is very small, right? Because
Right.
it's literally
Right.
just the Genesis transaction that created this OMB, send it to certain wallet, to the wallet of OMB guys, and then they distributed it, so they send it to you. And then it just stays there on your address until you decide, okay, hey, I want to sell this thing. I want to give it to somebody. And then you basically
Right.
transfer it. And that's what creates that chain that, again, we collectively agreed this is how we're going to do it. So this is what the ordinal theory, the tracking of those sats that we discussed is all about. And this is what all the wallets, all the marketplaces, and everyone involved in this ecosystem, that's what they respect and how they work together collectively to make sure that this makes sense.
The most important thing to remember is that if we look over here, we have a Genesis transaction. This is the one that actually puts it on chain. And so this will associate some data, and now we're going to associate it with some SAT number. And in the case we just looked at, it was JPEG data. After that gets sent out, right, this is going to be spent to some output. The only thing that goes over to this output is that SAT number, right? The data is going to stay over here. The data only lives here. And if there's anything you remember today, I hope it's that. And so the data only lives there. And so, let's say that Jan, you owned this one and then you sent it to me, right? Now I have this SAT number. Let's say I want to send it over to Udi, right? So now Udi has this SAT number and he's the owner of it. But this data only shows up once. We've agreed that this SAT number is the one associated with this data. And as long as we have a way to know the SAT number for every SAT, then we've solved this problem. This SAT number always points back to this data. So it doesn't matter who the owner is, this SAT number always knows, okay, I belong to this data, or more accurately, this data belongs to me. So if I've to summarize what we talked about here today, it would be one, that the Ordinals protocol defines a system for indexing and tracking every SAT within the Bitcoin network. We learned that each SAT is indexed by a sequential number, and that sequential number is just defined by when the SAT first appeared on the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin comes in through the miner block rewards. As SATs are sent around, we've said, well, we're going to track these in a first in, first out method. So we've numbered them, and now we have a way to track them. And then finally, inscriptions are our way to associate this data we put on Bitcoin with a specific SAT. And so when we put that data in the ORD envelope, the Ordinals protocol knows, hey, this is an ordinal. I should pay attention to this data and associate it with this particular SAT.
Yeah, and that SAT is something that we're then sending around, and we're creating this vibrant ordinal ecosystem around, because now you can have people that own different JPEGs as part of different collections and stuff like that. And it's all about those SATs that are being sent around, and we know what is the number of that SAT, we know which wallet holds it, etc. If you happen to have any further questions, please let us know in the comments below or reach out to us in the DMs, and we would be more than happy to cover it further. But other than that, I think this has been great, Tyler. Thank you so much for your time.
I hope this was a good one. I know it's a lot, but I think it's really important for everyone to understand, what are you actually owning when you say you own a digital artifact on Bitcoin? And now hopefully you have a bit better sense for what that actually means.
Awesome. We'll be back soon, guys. Cheers.
Bye.